A few years ago, I wrote a book called Trail of Feathers, In Search of the Birdmen of Peru. Nothing really in life gets me quite as excited, enthusiastic, and just sheer worked up as the prospect of a huge quest in search of something that I know nothing about at all. And unlike some of my more serious writer friends, I like research, but I think research has to be done in moderation, especially before you go on a big trip. So what I tend to do is buy my airplane ticket, pack a whole load of useless stuff which I know I won't ever use, and get going. But the thing you need first of all is the seed. You need something that will get you moving in the right direction, and in the direction of a huge quest, because I'm this great believer that the higher the bigger your goal, the higher you set the stakes, the greater the trip you're going to have, and the more fun you're going to have. Because in a way, it's only about having fun and having an interesting time. Those to me are the most important things of all. And I'm always open for looking for this, I don't know, you could call it like I did, a seed. And at one time I was going through some really boring, thick manuscripts in a library, and they'd been written by the conquistadors, and I was lucky that I had access to one particular manuscript written by someone called Antonio Calancha about the Incas, and it's about as thick as the 9X New York telephone directory, and far less fun than the 9X telephone directory, I might add. And it goes on and on and on and on about how stupid the Incas are and how they never managed to create anything, and how they need to take the word of God and that sort of thing. But then, somewhere in the middle, there was a line that caught my eye, and it said, "And the Incas flew over the jungles like birds." And I had been reading this boring text in which it was embedded about Inca farming of potatoes, which is a really interesting subject, but the Calancha had written this really dull text on. And so my eyes jumped out of my face when I saw that the Incas flew over the jungle like birds. And I knew right there and then that was a Eureka moment. It was the seed I had been looking for, a seed that I really didn't even know I was looking for, but I knew it was the beginning of a great journey. So I did a little bit of research, not very much, and I tried to work out if the Incas had really flown. And I knew the best thing to do would be to go to Peru and to go on a trip, and because Peru is where the Incas were, and to try to make sense of this all. The first place I reached, really, actually it wasn't the first, but the first interesting place I reached was Iquitos in the upper Amazon. And this is a town really in the middle of nowhere in a province called Loreto. And it's a town that had been immensely wealthy in its own right in about 100 years ago from now. So the Edwardian age of Peru, when the rubber industry in Iquitos in the jungle was rolling at its height. And in this town, fantastic town, Iquitos, there are some extraordinary buildings, some of them which had actually been designed and built by Gustav Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower, and they've been shipped lock, stock and barrel to the upper Amazon a century and a bit ago. So I landed up there, and I went on a river journey trying to make sense of the Incas. This was after a big tip-off, and trying to make sense of whether the Incas did indeed fly over the jungle like birds, which seemed a bit wacky to me, and all the more interesting because it was wacky. And I was introduced to a rather crazed guy called Richard Fowler, who was a Vietnam vet, and he said he would take me into the jungle alive and bring me out alive. And on the strength of that promise, he took me into the upper Amazon on this crazy old boat, called the Pradera, which was falling to bits. It was a little bit like the African Queen before she was blown up. And it was cockroach and rat infested, and quite a lot of fun. Now I look back on it. At the time it was vile and indescribably horrid. And we got to stay with a tribe called the Shuar, who are sometimes called Hivaro, but they don't like being called that because that means native in their language. And the Shuar were formerly famous because they used to shrink human heads to about the size of a grapefruit by removing the skulls and filling the pocket of skin that is the face and the back of the head and all of that, filling it full of hot stones and then hot sand and then warm sand until it shrinks down very beautifully. And I became, as a byproduct of this project, massively obsessed by shrunken heads because I just think they are objects of extreme beauty and a handicraft that has never really quite been understood in the Occidental world, because to the Shuar there is nothing of importance at all about the shrunken head. They always just used to toss them away until the rubber people from the West used to come and buy them. But so they would throw them away because to them the only reason you would create a shrunken head would be to tame the avenging soul of the person who you had killed. So anyway, I'm getting off the subject here. So the Shuar were interesting because they shrunk human heads at one time, but they've all sadly now become Seventh-day Adventists, which was a deeply sad, miserable thing for me to find. The Seventh-day Adventists fly down in land on the rivers in these flying boats and give everyone little pink pills and teach them the word of the Lord. And they come from Alabama, which is a sadness because the Shuar have lost their traditions overnight, and they've lost their immunity as well because they've been given these little pink pills, and I'm quite down on that. But more interesting was that the Shuar are taking a hallucinogen called ayahuasca, generally known as ayahuasca, and it's created from the inner part of a bark of Banisteriopsis carpi, of this vine, and it's mixed with several other plants and brewed at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time to create what is known by our society, by chemists in our society, as a monoamines oxidizing inhibitor. And what that means is that if you take this really noxious drink, it's kind of like a black mixture of coffee and sludge, if you drink it, your body is tricked into absorbing chemicals which have been added to this that your body would normally filter out. And the strange thing that nobody can really work out is how the shamans in the upper Amazon, in Peru and Ecuador as well, had isolated ayahuasca, this MAO inhibitor, and worked out how to use it. For the Shuar, and the big point here, which I forgot to mention, my central point, is when you take ayahuasca, which I did, it gives you the sensation that firstly that you're dying because your body is being poisoned, and you defecate and throw up uncontrollably. And if you're in a longhouse surrounded by mud in the upper Amazon, it ain't pretty. But the big point here is you feel that you are growing wings and flying, especially when it's mixed with something called Datura, Brugmansia arbori, which has these fantastically magical yellow or white or pink flowers, which are also known as the trumpet of the devil. And a member of the potato family, Datura, Brugmansia arbori, was used by medieval witches, which probably gave them this sensation that they were flying. And they used to apply a salve made from it on their inner thighs, and then they would apply it deeper with a broomstick, which they would be straddling, and then they would pass out for 24 hours, as I did. And when they came to, they would shout to their other witch friends, I flew, and I flew over London, or whatever it was. So another interesting thing to me was that the Shua would never, ever take ayahuasca, which is the central thing in their lives, except for Seventh-day Adventism. They would never take ayahuasca except if there was a reason. They would certainly never take it as a recreational drug. And I'm massively outspoken against people who take ayahuasca for no reason at all except to get high, mainly because it's incredibly unpleasant and you feel that you're being poisoned and you defecate and vomit uncontrollably. And I think it strips it of all meaning by taking it to the West and having it in a sort of cushy comfort zone. I think that's terribly, terribly wrong. I'm very, very against that. But more importantly, to the Shua, you would only take ayahuasca if you had a problem in this world. And to the Shua, they say that we live in an illusionary world, in a land, in a realm where nothing is what it seems and nothing is real. And that if we have a problem in this illusionary world, what we have to do is take ayahuasca and fly like a bird into the real realm, the real world, and find answers for this realm, this world in which we live. So Trail of Feathers is an account of this journey that I made through Peru, looking for answers. And the conclusion that I came to was that Calancha, the conquistador monk who wrote that the Incas flew over the jungles, my conclusion was that he was talking about allegorical flight rather than real flight, the kind of thing that you could do, if you jumped off a mountain with a big poncho, or the kind of thing that Da Vinci described round about the same time.